So first of all, to everyone, welcome. It's very nice to be with you on a Thursday evening here as you're either home. Some of you may be still at school or on the way home from school. Thanks after what's already been, I'm sure, a long week in your classes for taking the time to come and be a part of this first ever training for Mentora Teacher Training Institute. Now, this is really a big occasion for us because it's Mentora Teacher Training Institute's goal to serve as the teacher development center for all Bachelor College English teachers and starting this year, but continuing into the future. It's our hope that we can provide ongoing trainings on a consistent basis. This first course will be on Thursday nights for the next month. You're all invited back for the next sessions as well. But then after the last session is finished in 4 weeks, we're hoping that consistently throughout the school year, from a variety of experts in the field around the world, that you will have opportunities to continue learning about a variety of areas that are really important in our academic program, of course, at Bahçeşehir, but also to the field of ELT in general. So good professional development opportunities for all of you. Now, I'm going to start tonight. Before I say anything else, I'm going to do a little activity with all of you so we can get into the mode of thinking life skills. A little icebreaker. It's called wordplay, something I hope all of you will try with your students, at least the middle school teachers in the group. You could try this with your students. I want all of you to consider a scenario here. Consider and imagine you live in a world where there are only 10 words. You can use these 10 words as much as you want, but you cannot use any other words. Which 10 words would you choose and why? Now, I know all of you cannot, in just the few minutes we're going to use for this task, come up with 10 words immediately. However, using the chat box, I want you to just think for a few seconds and give me a couple of words that come to mind. Now, I'm going to pose this immediately to our moderators, Zeynep, Vahap, Ece. Any of the three of you, feel free to jump in. What do you think? What is a word that we could use in this world?
Most probably I would pick, first one as please, because I can use please for very different purposes.
That's a good point, Vahap, and that fits you well too. You're a very polite person. I would have imagined that you might have come up with the word please. But let's think, for me, please seems kind of a polite word when I'm asking for something nicely, but is it very functional? If I only have 10 words, can I complete all of the functions of daily life with those other 9 words? I wonder, Ece, what do you think? And could you also tell us some of the chat box words as well?
Well, I'm seeing yeses and nos, which make a lot of sense to me as well.
I think yes and no we can put on the list for sure.
Yeah, I see daily needs as water, food. I would also add get or take to the list because they're very functional in practical life.
Okay, so action words. Yeah, verbs definitely important, right? I think you and me, I think having to, or at least the name, my name, and then at least the name of one other person who can help me accomplish anything. What about the chat box? Are we seeing any good or funny examples there?
Good, bad, food, eat.
Love, we see, actually. We see love.
Hey, very nice.
Yeah, that goes
We're getting into the realm of
too,
emotions then. And also it's 6 p.m., so we have a lot of hungry teachers. So we see
Exactly.
Food and eat, of course. Well, all of you feel free to have a bite to eat for dinner or a snack at least while you enjoy this session tonight. Okay, wordplay is a nice icebreaker to use. I enjoyed for many years doing this activity with high school students in a theory of knowledge class. This is one of many activities that you are going to find over these next 4 weeks. In sessions 2 and 3 of this course, literally the entire sessions are just giving you dozens of activities that you can do with your students at the K-8 levels in order to help develop life skills. Now, you're still asking, what are life skills exactly? Well, that's coming. But just very quickly, I want to do an overview. As I said, the next 4 Thursdays, including tonight, 6 to 7:30. The sessions will typically run about 6 to 7. We might go over a little depending on how long the activities take, but then from 7, let's say 7:10 to 7:30, we will be doing questions and answers. If you have questions, of course, and if you don't, we will wrap up early, of course. Now, this last sentence is very important. All resources and weekly discussions, there will be asynchronous discussions connected to each session. Those may be accessed on the FLD Life Skills blogs. Now, some of you might also be asking, what is that? I'll be telling you as well, and you can get all information in the follow-up to this presentation. In the morning, we'll be sending everything out, including this presentation. Now, the agenda for tonight, we are going to start by defining life skills, both what it means in general, what you think it means. I'm going to elicit some definitions from you. And also, we're going to talk about, most importantly, actually, what it means for our role as teachers at Botchishire College. We're going to talk about developing a critical lens, what that means. With students as young as kindergarten, we already need to be thinking about how to get them to see the world around themselves critically. Very important word, the root word actually of all life skills. We're going to talk about the ways of knowing. Now, I think we might have a few teachers from Kocaeli campus, which is our one IB campus. You've probably heard that phrase. If any of you have experience with the Theory of Knowledge course in the International Baccalaureate program, you surely have as well. I'm not referring specifically to anything about IB tonight, but we will be talking about ways of knowing, referencing some terminology from that course. Also, we'll be talking about activities you can do to challenge your young learners right away. I will say most of the activities tonight are for you. This is for us to get engaged and to tune in to these sessions, whereas starting next week, all of the activities shared will be for your learners. We will then talk about a couple of other very important terms. Bias specifically is one that we will cover tonight. We'll introduce that. We will also talk a little bit about media literacy. So I'm picking and choosing. As with any presenter, I'm always going to make choices that fit best with what I consider to be the best fit with my own expertise, my own areas of interest. Specifically, if you ask me, I think critical thinking and media literacy are two of the central and most important components of life skills. The Life Skills Initiative, this is what our training tonight and the next 4 weeks is a part of. For the first year now, in the Botchishire College Foreign Languages Department, we are taking on a massive initiative to integrate life skills into our curriculum explicitly. This means generally an effort to improve teaching and learning in our schools. It means specifically K through 8 in all of our classes. Per unit in our curriculum now, we will have at least one learning hour devoted explicitly to life skills activities like the ones you're going to see in this course. You will have lesson plans that include life skills hours now. You will also have resources that you can access via our life skills blogs, which I'm about to show you in just a second. You may also choose your own materials and plan your own lessons, however. I'm very excited to say this. I know I've heard feedback for the last 3 years from Botchishire College teachers who wish they had just a bit more flexibility sometimes from our plans. Well, the Life Skills Initiative is also aimed at giving all of you that room to try out activities that you think might work best with your own students that might differ from other classrooms in your school or other schools in our foreign languages program and in our Botchishire school system. And finally, just so you know, the brains behind the initiative, of course, along with your contributions as teachers, we have our life skills work group, and it's headed by Sarpil Hoja, our local department head in Kocaeli campus, and also our main office team. I'd like to give special mention to Talar Hoja, Seda Hoja, Deniz Hoja in main office for your contributions with our planning. Now, the life skills blogs, we have differentiated blogs for kindergarten, primary, and middle school. These are password protected. You can get the web address and you can get the passwords, of course, from your local department head. If you have not received this information yet, make sure you mention this to them in the next week, and they'll make sure you get everything you need to sign into the life skills blog. So why life skills? that's where we're going to start. Tonight's just a bit more theoretical, just a bit of background before we dive in, because you need to know what's the reason we're doing all of this. Now, if any of you attended my talk back in the FLD symposium back in May, you remember me saying that our students are facing unique challenges now, challenges that all of us, when we were at their ages, didn't necessarily face. This requires life skills that might also be quite different than the life skills that were applicable when we were at the same age. Specifically, our students today are facing everything you see on this list, from a rapidly changing media landscape, information overload, if you've ever heard that term before, with all of the different sources of information that they have today, a glut of narratives, so many people telling them a version of the truth. Whereas when we grew up, if any of you like me remember the days before the internet, we had one source of mainstream news and we had limited narratives. Whereas today that has changed drastically. We also have an unknown future. 85% of 2030 jobs have not yet been invented. You've seen statistics like this, all of you, numerous times over the past several years. We also have a generation gap and lagging systems. I think as teachers, some of you have started noticing that there's even generation gaps between student groups, between just a few years of separation of student groups now. The fifth graders, for example, now are nothing like the fifth graders we saw even a decade ago. Change is increasing, it's accelerating. It's becoming increasingly interconnected as well. Other threats to security like cybercrime and threats to digital security. Finally, this last point, the Flynn effect is actually something academics have tracked throughout the 20th century that generally showed an increase in IQ levels among the general population for much of the 20th century. Well, for the last few decades, the general level of cognitive skill as measured on IQ tests by Scandinavian researchers has been shown to be decreasing. So maybe a connection with the way we're interacting on social media and with technology, maybe. I'm not going to give you that answer, actually, but I am going to say that this is not a course about technology specifically, not about teaching students how to use technology. For the most part, I want to give you activities actually that allow you really to interact and engage with your students on a human level. So a lot of these life skills activities is not going to be a list of apps that I share with you. It's not going to be a lot of technology tools. I just wanted to get that out of the way at the beginning. Now, enough from me for a couple of minutes. I want to hear from you before I give you my answer. In the chat box, try defining life skills in as few words as possible. That is your task. So please give me a definition and try not to use the words life and skills. Life skills are skills for life. I know that, but try to give me something that gives me a full understanding of what kind of skills we're talking about. While our participants are brainstorming, Zeynep, Ece, Vahappe, any stab at this definition?
Well, being able to adapt, being able to survive in the modern world, trying not to use the word skill and life.
Well, that was a good definition. Actually, in the scheme, I'm going to show you adaptability and flexibility is a sub-skill. So that certainly is something to consider. Any contribution? Ece?
I would say learning to learn for myself. We see a lot of survival in the chat box, knowing how to survive, having a plan B and C.
And I see ability to be flexible to new challenges. Exactly. I agree on that.
Well, adventure is the most interesting one. Yes, I mean, adventure, maybe we can connect it to a kind of skill again, but survival skills, I guess.
Well, survival and adventure, I guess, depends on how you interpret them, but certainly most of what you've said, it could certainly be fit into what I'm about to show you in terms of a scheme for defining life skills. Let me move to that. Let me then warn you, actually, I tricked you a little bit. I asked for as few words as possible. I asked, ideally for a one-sentence definition. So that would give you what we would call a formulaic definition of life skills. Something that you might look up online. Actually, a lot of times if you look online, you see 21st century skills. You see a strong connection there. I intentionally didn't want to use the phrase 21st century skills initiative because we're in the third decade of the 21st century. It starts to get a phrase also that's overused. I think life skills encompasses even more. However, I think we don't even need to worry about the last slide. We don't need to worry about a formulaic definition. We need to worry about a programmatic definition. And what does that mean? What's the difference? A programmatic definition is something that gives us a framework, a set of criteria and standards, something that we can use to organize an academic program that allows us to actually instruct and measure how students' outcomes have allowed them to reach a certain level of performance in their life skills, rather than a formulaic sentence like 21st century skills that allow us to flexibly adapt to the world around us, or whatever that might be. Now, I'm going to show you here what I would say then fits in terms of getting us toward a programmatic definition, because I like categorizing. I like having a list of different life skills so that then under each category, I can have subcategories and I can then align descriptors and I can have criteria and standards accordingly. That's how my brain works, but that's also what we would need then in creating a life skills program for Bachchere schools. What exactly are included in those life skills would be the first question programmatically. Those would include these four categories right here: 21st century themes, learning and innovation skills. So many of you immediately, you might have actually, I didn't see the chat box myself, but some of you might have put the 4 C's. You hear those a lot as part of a definition of life skills. Well, those are here: learning and innovation skills, as you see right here, information, media, and technology skills, and career skills right here, which I think can often be overlooked, strangely enough, seeing as how we are preparing students eventually for an academic and a professional career. Now, some of these are highlighted. I'm not going to go through each of the subcategories here, but I am going to share the document from the Partnership for 21st Century Learning, which is now owned by an organization called Battelle for Kids. I'm going to share the document from which I drew all of this information as part of the resources that you will have access to tomorrow, right after the course.
Mr. Benson.
Mr. Benson, you're mute. Yeah.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. Someone muted me. Okay, so you
this
will
is a
have
life
access
skill as
to
well.
the P21 framework in much more detail than this slide shows. Tomorrow, it will be shared on the blogs. However, you do notice that some of these are highlighted. Now, I told you this is a 4-part course, 1.5 hours maximum per part. It's impossible for me to give you resources to cover all of these areas. As a matter of fact, we might have follow-up sessions where we can get more deeply into these areas. But please keep in mind, this part of the training is for K-8 teachers. There will be a high school version of this training coming up after the 4-week period, and we will include a bit more general information than is included in this training, because for K-8, you're looking more at foundational skills, of course, whereas with high school, we can have much higher level of sophistication for our students there. The other reason I've highlighted some of these is because I think they're the most important for some reasons. I think critical thinking especially is important because thinking critically is a root skill that just really drives a lot of these other subcategories. I think it's extremely important. Communication and collaboration, because that's how we go about the activities that you will see. And that's similarly here, as you see, flexibility and adaptability was Vahap's answer actually to the first question there. Social and cross-cultural skills. There will be a module in the 3rd session's training on intercultural communication. I think it's very important. However, the single most important phrase, in my view, is media literacy. I will be introducing what that is at the end of this session. I'll be working media literacy activities into the next 2 sessions. I just want to put a star by that phrase and make sure that all of you take it upon yourselves to follow up on what media literacy education is, what it means, and why it's so very important to all of our students out there spending such huge chunks of their lives on media and specifically social media. Now, another place where you can get an even more detailed programmatic definition of certain aspects of life skills is the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework. All of these documents will be available on our blogs. You can go into each category. It gives you very nice descriptors. Actually, here's an example for critical thinking. Gives you nice core areas, and then for each core area gives you more specific descriptors for different age groups to help you understand what does it mean when we say a student is thinking critically. Again, something beyond the general formulaic definitions, something to give you a clear path as a teacher for teaching these skills and competencies. At the root of all life skills is learning to question your own knowledge. That is my word of wisdom for all of you today. And let's begin the session proper now. Let's start at the very beginning, actually. I want to ask a question in the chat box once again. I want creativity now. I want one of the 4 C's. I want to see answers to the question, what is one thing you believe, but you can't prove? And I'm going to put a limit. You cannot put God. You cannot put you can put something spiritual maybe, but you cannot put a God or a religion. That is out for just for this activity. What is one thing you believe, but you can't prove? Now, I'm going to give you all just a couple of seconds to think about that. I have my answer, but I'm going to wait for Fahap, Ece, or Zeynep to jump in and give me your answer.
Mr. Benton, we have a lot of love as an answer. We have soulmates, and we have one that I know you will like. It's the multiverse theory.
Wow, who is that? Tell me who that is, because that is my answer too.
Yeah. I would say love as well, I think.
Okay, great. Love is a great answer. Actually, that's the answer I hoped for by closing off the religion side, because it's emotion, of course. How can we prove emotion? That gets into kind of difficult territory, of course. What's yours, Ece? Did you say love?
Yeah, love, but I think love can be proved, by showing your actions. It can be proved, but it's subjective. I don't know, Mr. Benton. I was gonna say like my spiritual power, but you closed it off.
Okay. Bahape, I wonder a different perspective. What would you say? Something you believe, but you can't prove.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of good words in the chat box that can help me. For example, evil, creativity, simulation. Yeah.
That seems like a deep answer there. I'd like to know more.
Exactly. There should be a lot behind it. Morals, nothing, I guess, as we believe in something we can prove. Wow.
Okay, so we have many philosophers in our cave.
Exactly.
Very nice to see. So it really depends, doesn't it? And my whole point for tonight is, in the first session, is to get you to keep those 2 words in mind. It depends. To get your students used to saying those words, it depends. Getting them to question everything they believe and getting them to understand what the idea of proof really is. Well, I'm going to tell you now what knowledge is, or at least what a definition attributed to the great philosopher Plato: justified true belief. Those are the 3 levels of how we can certainly say something is knowledge, general knowledge, knowledge that's accepted. And that means we need evidence. We need to be able to prove with evidence. So when I say proof, I mean, you have to show me. That can be different things, obviously. We're going to talk about that, but that's the first level, justification. True, it requires a basis in reality, and it also has to be measurable then. And belief. Knowledge requires a personal or shared acceptance. So in that case, I'm going to throw some more questions at you then, and I'm going to throw some claims at you, some things that I think pretty much all of us would not tend to question in our daily life, just as our students likely wouldn't either. For example, the sentence, the sky is blue. Well, right now my sky is, there's blue sky out there. It's cloudy, it's sun's starting to go down. It will soon be black. But the point is, the sky is blue on a sunny day. This would be a true statement of knowledge. Is that correct, Zainab?
Yes, exactly. Actually, my skies is kind of orange right now, Mr. Benton.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But of course, on a normal day, in the middle of the day, if the sun
Yeah,
is out,
it's generally blue. Yeah.
how would
correct.
you know the sky is blue? How can you prove that to me?
I can't. They taught me. They said that this is blue. This is
Right,
we call
but
this blue.
you can perceive the differences between red and blue,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
How?
sure.
How do you see those differences?
I mean, I know that this is blue and it's not red, but I can't. I mean, I can't say why.
Exactly.
I don't know
So
why.
that is your most basic level of knowledge. That is your
Yeah.
sense perception. That's what you perceive. And the answer I was trying to tease out of you, Zainab, was my eyes see that it's blue. And so of course we can get a much better scientific answer on why we see color blue from probably a science teacher or maybe anyone more knowledgeable than me. However, I can say though that sky is blue is knowable from my sense perception. What about 5 + 5 = 10? Would you agree with that and say that is true knowledge, Vahappe?
I'm not a scientist and a kind of science man, but I have to say it's true, I guess. And I can prove this with my math knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't want you to prove your math knowledge is in your brain. I can't be sure of that. So you're a teacher. We have many teachers in this.
I can show that as well.
Exactly. So Vahappe is a high school teacher, so he goes immediately to the reason level. But show me, prove it to me right now on camera that 5 + 5 = 10. Exactly.
Let's count.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
and most of course, our kindergarten and primary teachers, something that they're quite used to doing, proving how to count. Now, it starts to get a little bit stickier, though, as we go up the list. And we look at the next one. China is the largest country on Earth. Is that true, Ece?
I would have to say that we would need to define large.
Thank you. So you're using those two words that I said on the last slide. It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on what you mean by the word large. Largest
Yeah.
by square kilometers,
Population.
largest by population, of course. I don't think China is the largest with either of those interpretations, actually. I think I think India might have a larger population. I think either Russia or Canada might have a larger square kilometer. Anyway, so we see it starts to get to the point where it depends now on language, depends on the word largest there. What about the next one? Football is the most popular sport in the world. Would you agree with that, Vahappe? Personally, is it your favorite sport?
Of course, yeah, of course. Personally, I would agree. But I mean, is it true? We should, again, define what, I mean, this is quite subjective because the most popular sport, you can prove that with quantitative data, but it's really hard, impossible to, exactly.
Quantitative data. So we start to need samples, surveys, samples of the population. We can't reasonably go and ask every person in the world if football is their favorite sport, of course. Now, as you go down, we're not going to do all of them, but once you get to the next one and the one after that, it starts to get to the level of opinion, maybe. It starts to get to the level definitely of interpretation, starts to get to the level of morality. Cheating is wrong, but aren't there some exceptions? We can't just make blanket statements. Couldn't there be a time when cheating is justifiable? Perhaps. Again, I'm not going to answer that for you, but when we start to talk about knowledge claims, we start talking about how very important it is to get our students in the mode of questioning what they think they know, and also to understand the difference between certain concepts like fact versus opinion. You're going to see next week in the session, I'm going to give you a lot of good resources for doing fact opinion exercises with primary students. And that's a great way to start getting students just to be aware of the concept of knowledge being relative, being questionable. And you see the last one, terrorism is a dangerous threat to our society, a very sticky situation. At that point, you're getting into political, social, economic ramifications that have to be considered, and you've come all the way from the sky is blue. How do we know? That's what we want, to get our students in the mode of not just telling us what they know, which is how a lot of traditional education systems are aligned, of course. We feed content to students and we get them to tell us what they know, which is actually what we know. Instead, we want them questioning what we tell them, and we then want them questioning what they themselves think as well. This is, as I said in the original agenda for tonight, developing a critical lens, because until you do that, it's very hard with young students to work your way up to all those other levels of life skills. Now, this is where IB teachers, anyone familiar with the IB program, will start to see terminology you might have heard before. Sense perception. I mentioned that before as a very basic way of knowing. Actually, all humans, actually, I think all animals, and to some extent, even plants, have the ability to perceive sensually. Then we get to emotion, feeling, language, and reason, which are quintessential human abilities, of course. When we get up to reason, this is when we start to differentiate between lower order and higher order thinking skills, which is another phrase that you've heard before. Specifically, we're putting focus in our program when we get to life skills on higher order thinking skills, developing these higher levels of reason. And we're going to work our way up through these in just a moment with some activities that can get us to question our knowledge in each of these categories. Now, I'm not going to cover the other ways of knowing tonight. I'm sure anyone with IB experience is saying, well, there's other ways of knowing too. Of course, there are, like memory, imagination, intuition, which is quite an interesting one for me, and also faith. However, for tonight, we're going to cover those first four, but just to mention that there are other ways of knowing as well. Sense perception is one category. And when you see the next slide, I want the chat box to go crazy, and I'm hoping everyone agrees with me. 6 years ago, this was the most popular topic in your teaching rooms and in your classrooms. And I'm very curious if you're right or wrong, right being agreeing with me, of course. Is it white and gold, or is it black and blue? Which I don't understand how anyone sees, but they told me that's the scientifically correct answer. But what do you see with your eyes? Can you remind me of the debate 6 years ago in the chat box? What are people saying, Ece, if you could moderate a bit? What does the total seem to lean toward?
I'm actually surprised right now because I see definitely black and blue, Mr. Benton, but I was sure that I was going to see black and blue answers, but right now I see a lot of white and gold answers too.
So I have a very depressing piece of information for all of the participants. I read somewhere that people, as they get older, tend to see white and gold more often. So that would certainly explain the differential between Zeynep and I, but I've also heard that black and blue is the correct answer. Of course, there's no correct answer if my eyes are telling me white and gold. I've even heard other answers like white and black, or blue and gold. I've heard other combinations even. But the point is, of course, sense perception activities like this in the classroom are great because they allow us to do two things with our students. For English practice, specifically, photo description activities are some of the best you can do, especially with young learners, to get them engaged. And once you throw in the element of questioning sense perception, then it just makes things even extra interesting. The way you can really do that is optical illusions. Now, I'm going to share a file with all of you, I think with 40 or 50 of these for you to try in your classes. Please try to blow your students' minds in the morning with this one in particular. I'm going to ask you, Ece, as I see you studying this carefully, how many different colors of circles do you see inside of these horizontal bars?
I see green, yellow, orange, pink,
kind of a peach orange color.
But they're changing as I'm talking to you. So
it's quite strange. I'm not doing that with my computer. Trust me. I'm not doing anything. It's just a static image. Vahap, you're looking as if you figured this activity out. So can you be the spoiler for us?
I'm old enough to see only 4 colors, Mr. Benton.
You see
I can see four
colors.
colors. I can see yellow, kind of greenish. I don't know. It's changing again. Pink.
Okay. Zainab, does
Yeah.
are there any spoilers in the chat box who were telling us the correct answer here?
Yeah, someone said
Tequila,
only one color.
tequila is seeing only one color.
Yeah.
That's the right answer. Whoever that is in the chat box is correct. There is only
Tequila.
one color.
Yeah.
The differentiation of the colors of the horizontal bars make it appear to our eyes as if we're seeing multiple colors, whereas there is only one color circle located inside of the bars. So this is just one example of optical illusions. Again, it will get your students passionately involved as they try to argue their perspective. But in the end, it's a nice way to get them just to see, in a very basic and fun level, the world is not always as it seems. Here's another one. This is a photo description activity. I want, Eje, I see you reacting there. I wonder if you could please describe to me what you see in this photo, just as an English spoken production photo description type of activity. Don't say anything about the illusion.
I see a man wearing high heels and he's hugging someone who's sitting down in front of a computer.
Okay, and I would agree, that's what I see as well. But of course, the world is not always what it seems. This is another list of resources that I'm going to share with you all through the blog. So again, photos that you can use with your students to describe that aren't always what they seem. And again, the students' minds will be blown when you show them the reality. Now, this is one that I would like you all to listen for. And actually, I'm so sorry. I've got to stop share because I forgot to enable my sound. And you have to hear this because this is called an oral illusion. And let me just share my screen, share my sound, and get the slide back. Oh, I have to type my password to do that. All right, so I just want to say that this activity works much better in the classroom. Unfortunately, because of Zoom and many participants, the sound quality and the video quality usually are jumpy, so it's hard to demonstrate, but let's try it. Now, all of you should look at the man's mouth very carefully, and you should listen to what the man is saying, and in the chat box, write down what you hear him saying, but not until he finishes, and you have to stare directly at his mouth. Here we go.
Ba, 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 ba.
I'm going to play it one more time.
Ba, 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 ba.
Okay, Vahap, what are you hearing?
Ba with B, Barcelona.
Okay, Eje?
Yeah.
I see Dada with D.
Okay, Zainab.
I see Gaga with G.
Okay, I promise to the participants we did not plan this. That's really three different answers. Honestly, I would agree with Zainab the first time I did this activity, but Vahap Bey is right, and I'm not sure about the chat box, by the way, Eje, but he is saying ba ba in terms of the sound, but his mouth is saying ga ga. When you blend those, usually the eyes see, like Eje said, usually the answer your students will give you is da da with a D. However, try it again. Everyone close your eyes.
Ba, 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 ba.
It's very clearly ba ba when your eyes are closed, of course. Again, an oral illusion. I'll give you a couple of those in the resources as well. And if nothing else, a fun activity with your students. Now, the eyewitness effect. This is a fun activity for you to do to demonstrate the fallibility of human sense perception. This is the bane of the existence of every police officer and detective in the world because they cannot trust eyewitnesses. Why? Well, I'm about to show you why, because we cannot trust you as eyewitnesses either. I'm going to flash an image of someone on the next slide very quickly, only once. And I'm going to ask you to train your eyes and try to understand every single physical characteristic of the person that you see. And then I'm going to ask in the chat box that you answer a few questions. I'm going to ask you as the detective. Here we go. That was quite fast, as I said, but I'm sure we have some very perceptive people. I'm sure that we will have some people who are totally wrong. Let's see. Can you please write in the chat box, what color was the person's eyes?
We're seeing
Another
a lot
color.
of blue, a couple
Okay.
green answers, gray. I think there was one black.
What type of necklace was the person wearing? What did it look like?
Pearls. Yeah, a lot of people are
Pearl.
saying pearls.
Okay.
Yeah, gold.
Did the person have eyeglasses on? You're saying yes, both of you there, but
Yeah.
any no's in the chat box?
Mostly yes, a couple of no's, by the way.
Okay, does anyone know who that was? I will then be impressed. It's a Hollywood star, actually, in America, but not, I think, not one so famous that everyone would know.
Was it? It's not Nicole Kidman, right, Mr. Benton? But it really
No.
looks like.
What kind of outfit did the person have on? Did it look like a shirt, button-up shirt, dress, blouse, jacket?
Steven said Katie Couric or Couric.
Katie Couric. Okay, that's not a bad guess. Now let's go back and see who we had here. Now, first of all, I tried to trick you. There was no necklace. So the person who invented the pearls, that was interesting, but I think pearls would fit the style. The blue eyes, I think that those do look blue. So that was quite a good perception there. The eyeglasses obviously are there. The actress is, I believe her name is Annette Bening. She, back in the 90s and early 2000s, was in many movies back in those days.
Yes,
I
Pilling got the right name, actually.
Oh, did she?
Pilling,
Nice
yeah.
job. And to notice in less than a second, that was quite a good job. Now, you can do this activities with your students. I used to really trick my students. At the beginning of the year, I would always have a teacher who they didn't know from another subject come into our classroom, walk through the classroom with no announcement, and just walk out. And then 20, 30 minutes later, I would say, remember the teacher who walked in 20, 30 minutes ago? I want you to describe every detail of her physically, and you would have some of the strangest answers. And then, of course, the teacher would come back and introduce herself, and we would compare the differences from what the students perceived and the reality, of course. Again, fun activity demonstrating fallibility of sense perception and our knowledge in that area. Now, emotion. I don't have a lot here because I had to really cut a lot of these sections to make sure we weren't here all night. However, I wanted to show you one thing, and please keep in mind that the majority of these activities are not for you to take to your classroom. This is for us tonight. This is to engage you. This is for you to take this weekend. If you do a brunch or you have a meal with your friends, you can sit down and discuss these. Specifically this test. Now, this is from Harvard University, actually. It's a sociological experiment conducted worldwide. I'm going to post the link tomorrow in the blog. However, the test is measuring your ability to perceive other people's emotions. So it's an empathy test. It's a social intelligence test. And as many of you might guess, the root of empathy is ability to think critically and to especially to consider emotions critically. So looking at this, just the eyes of this man here, I would ask you, Vahap, is this man terrified, upset, arrogant, or annoyed?
Well, for me, he looks upset.
Upset. You know,
Yeah.
I would probably agree with you, Vahap, but I took the full test on Harvard's website and I did not do very well. So I don't know if I would trust my answer.
I wouldn't do very well, yeah.
But this is, I think there's 35 to 37 questions. Some of you, for your middle school students, you could try, but the vocabulary typically is B2 and above.
From Mr. Benton, from his eyebrows, I mean,
Yeah.
They give me the message that he's upset. I don't know.
I would have said ashamed, to be honest. That came to my mind without seeing the adjectives they gave. But in the test, you cannot write your own adjective. You have to choose one that they give you there. Okay. Another site that I'm going to share for all of you that is a really great place to go. It's loosely connected to emotion, but I wanted to mention it because it's a great resource for some readings that are quite accessible, especially for A2, B1 learners. Good News Network, when you're trying to get media text into your English lessons, it's a great place to go because many of you have heard the phrase bad news bias in the media. And of course, a lot of the stories that we read online are about death and destruction. However, the Good News Network only features articles about, as you could guess, good news, heartwarming, happy stories, typically with English levels that are a bit more accessible. So that's just a little side note that will be included in the resource list from tonight. However, I would like to move to language. Now, there's some really fun activities to do with language, but the nice thing to do with languages is getting into the territory of intercultural communication and getting your students to see that their language, whether it's Turkish as their first language, or whether it's English as a foreign language, or for some of our students that are bilingual, English as an additional first language, we want to look at the nature of knowledge and how it's tied to any particular language that is formulating that particular knowledge. So in different languages, you have some words that are not quite so easy to translate into English. I'm about to ask you all to give me a couple of those words in Turkish, but for any of you who speak German in the group here, maybe you know this word, Waldeinsamkeit, which I didn't know. I speak some German, but apparently it is a word that cannot be translated into one word in English. There's no corresponding word. So does that mean a German person can feel this in a different way than I can? For all of you linguistic relativists out there, you might say yes. What about for Spanish? Sobremesa. The time spent after lunch or dinner talking to the people you shared the meal with. I think that's a great word. I think it's a nice concept, and it sounds to me like my romantic idea of Spanish culture. This one I put just because it was funny, and I wish that there were a word in English as well. A joke told so poorly and so unfunny that one cannot help but laugh. But I wonder, in Turkish, can any of you think of a word that cannot be translated directly into English? I can think of some that are close. For example, ortam in Turkish. There's not a perfect word. There's kind of environment, ambiance, feeling of a place. But
Estağfurullah.
Estağfurullah is a good one. I can't even explain what that means now, to be honest. Can you translate that, Vahap?
Serpil Hoca said nazar.
Nazar is a good one. Yeah. That's always hard because I understand. I've been in Turkey so long now. I understand Nazar, and my friends back in America want me to explain it, and it's tough. But I have to say, 13 years in Turkey, speaking Turkish almost every day, I learned a new word today when I was actually looking for one to add to the presentation. I found this. So I'm seeing some reactions. Vahap, you seem like you might not know this word. Do you know? Yakamoz.
I do know that word, yeah.
Can you explain it to me?
It's the reflection of moon on the sea or on a lake in at night.
Okay, I see. So that's, as you can see, as our past slides, quite a long explanation. So I've got a list of these that I'm going to give you in Turkish, some in other languages too, but at least for Turkish, just to jog your memory, it's really fun, especially with the middle school teachers sometimes, to sit with your students and get them to try to give you explanations of what these words are, translations as it is in English. There are also words, however, that your students will surely know much better than you. And it's really nice activity. And I think a great way to do critical thinking in class is always when your student becomes the teacher and is explaining things to you. A lot of these words of the 21st century, especially those that are tied to technology like this here that I've listed here, a lot of them your students will know better than you. Some of you might not even know what some of these mean right now. I promise you, if you go to class, again, especially we're getting to the point where probably your middle school students would be where you would start. But those of you with, let's say, 6th or 7th graders, tomorrow, if there's anyone on this list that you don't know, go to them and get an explanation. And finally, reason. So most of the examples I've shown so far were meant to be light and fun, things that can get you in a lighthearted way to question the nature of your knowledge. But really, the reason we're here is to talk about this level, reasoning ability. And this is where critical thinking really comes in. Now, some of you might have heard of the term syllogism, which is a formulation of deductive reasoning, which is taking general ideas and reaching a specific conclusion. Like this example right here, all plants need water, roses are plants, so roses need water. A is B, C is A, therefore B is C. That's our formula, and we can progress through. Now, I've got a nice worksheet for this. Typically, I only share it with high school teachers, but I'll put it in the group so at least all of you have access. But still, it's nice to get students to go through some of these activities to get them to understand, once you get to faults in reasoning, why something might not be true that looks true. Another form of reasoning before we look at an example is inductive reasoning, taking specific observations and moving to broader conclusions. For example, making predictions. Housing prices have risen every year for the last 5 years. Housing prices will rise again in 2021. Now, we live in Istanbul, so that's definitely true. That is not faulty reasoning at all. But of course, you cannot prove that just based on what's come before. You cannot know that for sure, of course. That's an inductive guess. It's a prediction. Beware of logical fallacies. So when we are first thinking as teachers in terms of how we're presenting information to our students, and we're thinking of how the students then are in their own minds coming to some kind of a consensus on what is true or false, it's nice to give them opportunities to review when things might not be true, but they look true. For example, the cat at the pet store hissed at me. All cats hate me. Now, why might that not be true? Zeynep, can you explain?
I mean, I can't. It's not true. Not all cats. It doesn't mean that we can't say by looking just one cat that all cats will hate me.
Okay, that was a perfect explanation. That was exactly the sentence. Yes, exactly. Just from one isolated example, obviously we cannot generalize to presume to know what all cats would feel toward you, of course. Here is one I had to put in. All Americans like to eat fast food. Mike is an American. Mike likes to eat fast food. Now, is that a fallacy? It kind of seems like it follows the syllogism structure here. All Americans like to eat fast food. Mike is an American. Mike likes to eat fast food. Then it should be true, of course. But the problem is, of course, in the root here. This is a stereotype. All Americans like to eat fast food is not a fact. Again, we're getting into fact and opinion. Now, I happen to be American, and I like to eat fast food, actually, but I don't necessarily eat it very often anymore. But still, you can certainly find an example of American that doesn't. Another inductive fallacy is shown here. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time as I see the time going quickly. However, I'm going to give you a list of these logical fallacies. You can consider them yourselves, but you can also simplify and pose them to students and get them to look and get them just to understand this looks like it's true, but why might not it be? Introducing them to the idea of stereotype and bias is a great thing to do as early as possible. Rationalization and cognitive bias, like I failed because my teacher hates me, and you might have gotten that reaction yourselves before from a student in your very classes. Obviously, we see that that is not true. However, students have that perception as a logical fallacy. Getting into bias then, and getting into one reason why sometimes reasoning, both deductively and inductively, might have issues, might have faults, might have fallacies. And that's because we all have bias, because we're human. It's a natural inclination for or against an idea, object, group, or individual, often learned, and is highly dependent on variables like a person's socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, educational background, etc. Now, it's hard to approach bias, especially when you're getting with young kids. However, you can at least introduce concepts to your students like our minds do take shortcuts. We sometimes come up with, and by the way, this is a nice graphic including dozens of bias types that I'm going to share just in case you're interested in learning about it yourselves. However, with students, I like to do a little activity, getting them just to become aware of their own basic biases through a stereotypes activity. This is one that we can do together right here just to test it out. I want you, Eje, to share not 3, but share 1 adjective that comes to mind when you see the first word on this list.
Boys. But it's not an adjective.
Exactly.
Pretty.
Has to be a descriptor.
Pretty, I'll say.
Pretty. Okay, so
Yeah.
you immediately went to a positive description, but a physical description of girls. Okay, Vahape, I wonder the next word, if you can give me 1 adjective.
Wow.
As he feels under pressure, answering it.
Yeah,
to an
exactly.
American.
Because of you, I feel under.
You
But
can say negative adjectives. It's
I'm
okay.
being honest. I mean, it wasn't negative. First, well, America, I would think of, let's say great.
Great.
Because of
Okay.
Trump.
Okay, now I feel like you're probably not being honest, but America, great, a positive connotation. So
Yeah.
we're getting into this. Galatasaray football team, Zeynep.
Oh no. Okay.
I'm feeling this is going to be
Unsuccessful.
negative. Unsuccessful.
Come on.
Didn't
Sorry.
they win? I thought they won the Super League not that long ago. I think, wasn't it Fenerbahce who hasn't won? And
We got the most titles, Mr. Benton.
We've got. Okay, so I see
Yes.
already that Bob is putting himself into this Galatasaray group here, so must be a follower. So at any rate, so there's many other words on the list, but because time is going now, I just don't necessarily want you even to choose words like this. I just want you to make your students aware that when they have concepts, groups of people, types of people, places, countries, football teams, it can be the most fun examples you can come up with, but they all have perspectives that they're bringing to the class that they've received from the world around them. Often with young students, it's from their parents and their world at home, but it's very nice to make them explicitly aware of those perspectives because that's the root and the starting point of bias. And so I love to do that with students, even at a young age. And then to consider statements. So we're not just considering groups, we're also considering statements that we might take for granted. So we looked at knowledge claims before, but now we're getting to the point where we look at stereotypical statements that we might hear in society, like boys should never cry. Would you say that's true, Zainab?
No, of course it's not true. I saw many boys that cry.
Of
It's
course.
not true. No.
And do you view that negatively? Is that something that, is there anything wrong with boys? Because it says
No.
should never cry.
No, it shouldn't be a rule. I mean, we can't categorize people as boys and girls. So also they can cry too. They should cry.
Okay. So obviously posing questions like this, or it's not a question actually, statements like this that contain some value, at least give students an opportunity and give you right now in this meeting an opportunity to confront your own biases. So I will say, growing up in America, this is something I heard repeated from a very young age, especially from my peers. Boys don't cry. Come on, you can't cry. You're a boy. And as you go down the list, you see many others, some that are quite controversial. You go down some that are controversial, but oftentimes the data might back up. Like, for example, let's see, girls tend to collaborate in groups better than boys. I'm betting many of you teachers here would probably vote in the chat box and say, oh, that's actually pretty true from my experience. But that's a key word as well, from my experience. That doesn't mean you know all girls, but that means you do bring experience to the table and that you do have a right to share that. Students bring their own experience to the table. They have the right to share that, but they should also learn, obviously, to be respectful to the perspectives of the other students in the class. Again, critical thinking respectfully. Teacher bias, just a note, again, this is for you. I think some of these words here, especially the green ones, are things you might want to follow up on. I'm going to put this study in the blog, so you can follow up if you want to. However, the Pygmalion effect is so interesting to me. Teacher expectations of student success are more predictive than student motivation and student effort. If you think a student can do well as a teacher, that's the most powerful indicator of their actual success, even more than how much effort they give. Can you even imagine how powerful of a claim that is? And there's a whole study that essentially backs it up. I'd like you at least to consider that. Chicken and the egg paradox, what does that mean? It means then, are students naturally then successful, or does the success begin with that teacher passing on that positive expectation, or sadly on the other end, that negative expectation on them? Now, here's some other points here for teacher bias types. Not going to spend time now, but they certainly should be considered. Now, take out a sheet of paper and a pen, please. This is your final activity of the night. And my challenge for you is, I want you to do this in your classes tomorrow, even with the young ages, because they will surely like this, and it's an excellent listening activity. The only sad thing for all of you is you have to listen to me more. However, it's the final activity, and it's a fun one, I think. Take out a sheet of paper and a pen. Now, on my computer screen right now, I can see an image. And I'm going to do what you would know as a teacher as a guided drawing activity. I'm going to describe this image, and I want you to draw what you hear me describe on your paper. Now, you have a risk here because I'm going to ask you all to show it to the camera when you're finished. So try your best. I am going to try to give you as technical of an explanation as I can, of a description as I can, and here it goes. I see a large rectangle. The rectangle is horizontally oriented. It's a bit wider than it is tall, but not much. It's very large. On the top of the rectangle, there's a triangle. The triangle spans the entire length of the rectangle. The bottom segment of the triangle overlaps with the top segment of the original rectangle. Inside the large rectangle, there are 4 smaller rectangles. Starting in the bottom left corner, there's a rectangle. It's not touching any of the sides of the original rectangle. It's in the middle, but at the bottom left. In the top left, there's another rectangle. Same way, not touching any of the sides of the original rectangle. In the top right, there's another rectangle, same description, not touching any of the sides. And in the bottom right, there's one last vertically oriented rectangle. The bottom of this rectangle shares the bottom segment of the original rectangle. Now, I just tried exhaustingly to give you all a description of this, and I'm wondering what you came up with. I wonder, can I see some drawings in the camera here? 1 second. Ece Vahape, can you show me that again?
Sorry, I didn't have a paper. I just used this one and it
I
didn't
see.
work. Yeah.
Grabbed whatever he could find.
Exactly. I
Ece.
grabbed whatever I can find.
Okay, now I'm looking
Yes.
at other participants here. I'm just looking down through the list here. Oh, I see some that listen very well. I don't see your names on the boxes right now, so I can't call on who I'm seeing, but I see some that followed instructions very well. I feel like my description was quite effective then when I saw that. This is what I was describing to you. It's a house. Why didn't you just say it's a house? That's what you can ask. The point is, I just gave you an introduction to media literacy with one activity. And especially for young students, guided drawing activities are a great way to do that, because you're not explaining to students in primary school the descriptors of media literacy education, of course. You're just trying to get them familiarized with the fact that media is a construction, and it's a construction according to the perspective of a certain person who is producing that media. Media has producers, media has consumers. I just produced a form of media that you listen to, of course, based on a reality, which you see here, But my representation of that reality was quite different, I'm sure, than Vahape would have done, or Ece or Zeynep. Probably, I'm guessing Zeynep might have just said, it looks like a house with a door and 3 windows. And that would have been also a way to describe it. I took the technical route. I used words like horizontal orientation because I wanted to be precise. But sometimes precision doesn't always give the best image of reality, does it? I'll be putting an activity in the blog as well with a number of guided drawing activities like this, so you can use images with your class. Try this one tomorrow if you get the chance. For media literacy, you've got a lot of definitions. I'm not going to read them all to you tonight, but I want you to go through and understand what it is students are doing when they are being media literate, I suppose I should say. And if you see right here, those of you familiar with our integration of Bloom's taxonomy into our curriculum already, the reason I think media literacy is just so important is because it really does walk students all the way through those levels of thinking skills, all the way up to creativity, because we are raising students then who eventually will, and even in their classes now with projects and tasks, that will be creating their own media, which then represent their own interpretations of the world. Types of media, we're going to get into this a bit more next week, because I'm going to give you some actual classroom activities you can do with your students to point out bias in written text for our reading activities. But the reason I put this here now is this last bolded word right here, that when I'm talking about media literacy, I am putting special emphasis on social media, as I know, especially once students are in middle school, these days, social media is becoming such a big part of the world that they're interacting with. Such a big part that 2 years ago in America, adults even, not even with the younger generation, 18% were getting their news from social media primarily. Yes, I was shocked to see still 8% from radio, but social media, even in those 2 years, has grown a lot. Now, you might be wondering why I'm showing you about US adults and social media, but read this title. Americans who mainly get their news on social media are less engaged, less knowledgeable. Let this be a warning to us with students who are getting the majority of all of their information about the world, not just the news, from social media. This is something that I'm not saying is an enemy. It's not something that we demonize, but it is something that we look at strategies to help make sure that our students are safe, to make sure that our students are interacting with social media in a healthy, responsible way. And that's what I'm trying to say. 5 key questions for media literacy, and then I'm going to leave this topic for tonight. Who created the message? When you're presenting a text to a student, there are ways to cover topics like this. We'll talk about it next week. You're not going to ask a primary student who created this message, of course, but you can ask them questions to get them to reflect critically on the text that you're using in your classes. And that's what we need to focus on. What creative techniques are used to attract my attention? How might different people understand this message differently than me? What values, lifestyles, and points of view are represented in or omitted from this message? And finally, why is this message being sent? And this goes into what we do in many of our activities when we're focusing on higher order thinking, when we try to get students to consider author's purpose, when we start to get students to consider critically the message they're being given. Again, next week we will look at more. In the end, we can simplify for the young students, get them to stop, question, check, and then decide when they're reading the news or when they're reading social media. Now, I did reference theory of knowledge course. Not much of what we discussed tonight was directly from TOK course, but still, TOK is a critical thinking course, and there are tons of resources online. So if you want to go to a place where you can find supporting resources beyond what we give you in our blogs, I would recommend you at least go and learn more about what this course is, and I think it could be helpful. Otherwise, I am going to stop sharing here and open it up to the chat box to any questions you have for tonight. And I'm going to ask our great helpers, Vahape, Ece, and Zeynep, to moderate if you see anything here that we can address. Now I'm finally seeing the chat box, how much all of you were participating there. Very nice to see such engagement. Okay. Thomas, I see you wanted the link. Now I'll be posting everything, including the presentation in the blogs and sending those out tomorrow to local department heads. So let me just wait on that. But you know what? Maybe Thomas is excited and he wants to see it now. So let me do this for you. Actually, I will post that in the chat box now, Thomas, in case you'd like to follow up immediately. Now, otherwise, everyone, while I'm doing this, I can say that next week, come ready to be bombarded. Tonight was our theoretical framework. Next week is activities. We are going to be looking at critical thinking in receptive activities, which is reading and listening. Now, I know in our curriculum, we don't always separate out, especially in the young ages, reading lessons, listening lessons, speaking lessons. But at the same time, it's going to give you a number of ideas when it comes to your life skills lessons in your plans, where you will have plenty of ammunition to know what you can take in and do with your students in the class. We're going to start next week with about a dozen icebreaker activities that are great for life skills. So I will see you then. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And let me just see. There's no questions, so we don't.
So we have one, Mr. Benton.
Okay.
We have a question. It says, how can we measure cognitive teaching?
How can we measure cognitive teaching? Well,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm going to delay the answer to that to the fourth session, because the entire session is about assessment. It's about measuring. And I'm going to give you a lot of strategies for integrating specifically critical thinking measurement into summative assessments for exams. But I'm going to give you literally dozens of formative assessment activities that you can do. And those naturally include critical thinking embedded. So if you can be patient for just a few weeks, I hope your questions will be answered. If not, you can ask again in 3 weeks and we'll certainly discuss that together. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Go get some rest. You have a busy Friday tomorrow. Enjoy your day with your students.